Um, let's see, can you all see the PowerPoint? Awesome. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started, Cynthia.
All right. Again, Cynthia Safian-Rocha with the Youth Leadership Institute and Associate Director of Programs. Really excited to kind of take a deep dive into strategies for prevention. So this presentation, we call it Tools to Teach. What does environmental prevention look like? And as my colleague Jose mentioned, this is going to be a little bit more interactive, hopefully, and we're going to ask for folks to jump into the chat box to respond to some of the questions that are going to be asked during the presentation. All right, so we're going to ask folks to guess. According to the Fresno County Student Insight Survey that was conducted from 2018 to 2019, what percentage of 11th graders in Fresno County drink alcohol at least occasionally? Is it A, under 10%, B, 10 to 40%, C, 40 to 70%, or D, 70 to 100%? If folks can drop in their answers into the chat box. Pretty good. So it feels like most people on the call are really kind of knowledgeable about what the local underage drinking rates are in Fresno County. According to the Fresno County Student Insight Survey, the range is anywhere between 22 to 30%, depending on what school you go to, as a percentage of 11th graders in Fresno County who reported that they drink at least occasionally. But this number actually has been, does fluctuate somewhere between 22 to 30%. Most recently, our data shows that it's been about 22%. So the follow-up question is, what percentage of 11th graders in Fresno County have at least some sense that heavy drinking might be dangerous? You can drop your answer in the chat box. So on this one, folks were a little bit more all over the place. In actuality, our data shows that anywhere between 70 to 100% of 11th graders actually have a sense that heavy drinking might be dangerous. Most of them are actually pretty aware that there is some ramifications and consequences to engaging in underage drinking. What we did find, however, is that the level of consequence varies in terms of knowledge, but there is some sense that heavy drinking might be dangerous. And when we talk about heavy drinking, we specifically define this as having more than 5 drinks in one sitting or binge drinking. So how do we combat this issue, right, of, even though our percentage in Fresno County is, amongst 11th graders is about 22%, and the knowledge around the dangers of drinking sits somewhere between the 76 to 80% range. We know that this information is actively shared amongst young people in the school setting, through health education, but we recognize that if education isn't sufficient in raising awareness, then what do we do? Which is where YLI as a prevention provider steps in to provide that additional support.
And so to answer that question that Cynthia just asked is, how do we understand how to look at issues, not just from an individual perspective? And so pretty much we're gonna do an activity. So I'm gonna actually ask for people to participate in a moment in this part. And so I'm gonna play out a scenario to help us understand the difference between an individual prevention, individual approach and environmental prevention. So we have our dog. If anyone can drop a name in the chat box, the first name I see, just to name our dog, first name I see, I'm gonna go ahead and go with that name. So if I can get a name for the dog in the chat box, whoever drops that first name, I'm going with that one. We're gonna name our dog that name. So go ahead and add that in the chat box. Let's see. We're waiting. Any name is cool. Let's see. All right, Pritch. I saw Pritch. Pritch. I saw Pritch in there. So we're gonna call our dog Pritch. Now our dog Pritch has a little problem. Our dog Pritch actually has a flea problem. And so in this graphic, what you get to see is that we have our dog Pritch, we have the house in which our dog Pritch lives in, and we have the actual fleas individually. This is the group that's causing this problem. Our dog has fleas. And so I'm gonna ask my first question. So if I can get your comments in the chat box, in order for us to, my question is, what would you do to the dog specifically to help remove the fleas? So go ahead and type those into the chat box. What would you do to Pritch to make sure that we can get these fleas removed and that we can help prevent the fleas from coming back? What would you do specifically to Pritch? And you can be creative with this. This is a safe space. I see the first one, Dale, keep on adding. So Dale says, take Pritch to the vet. A flea bath from Raquel. It's Cynthia. Oh, wow, you said give him back? Okay, you went to one extreme. So Michael mentioned a flea bath. So these are some great suggestions. So, in terms of the dog, giving him a flea bath, giving him back, taking him to the vet, scold him, Cynthia, how dare he get those fleas, right? And so these are different ideas for what you can do to the dog. Now, I want you to think about, let's look at the house. So say, for example, you gave the dog a flea bath, give him back, or actually give him a flea bath, take him to the vet, What would, do you think that long-term, would that in itself, just doing that, would that remove the issue of fleas long-term? Say if you gave them a bath, took them to the vet, would that take care of it long-term? So you take them to the vet one time. If it can get a yes or no answer in the chat box just to gauge where you're at. Do you think that long-term it would take care of it? Is there a high chance? Okay, perfect. Awesome. So I see different people saying no, because there's a chance that they can come back, right? The dog is still in the backyard. Pritch is in the backyard. And so I'm actually gonna move into the fleas, actually, instead of the house. First, I'm gonna do the fleas. What would you do to this group of fleas, which are the problem? They are the ones that are sticking to Pritch, and they're not letting Pritch go. What would you do specifically to the fleas? I want to hear some ideas. And again, you can be creative with this. I've heard some funny stuff from young people. So definitely feel creative with this. What would you do to the fleas to make sure that they're gone, that they're no longer on this dog? What would you do to the fleas? Go ahead and add those in the chat box. I want to see some creative stuff. Go ahead and add them. Shave Pritch, okay. I would say let's focus just specifically on the fleas. What would you do to the fleas? So outside of just the dog, what would you do to those fleas? What would you do? Let's see. Let's get some comments in there. Charge them rent. Why? How dare you be staying on Pritch for free, right? And so Raquel, I love yours. Turn them against each other. They'll take care of themselves. That's a great idea. That is right. And so they'll probably beat each other up. And so maybe they'll get off Pritch. Cynthia, burn them. That's a great one. So yes, you can burn these fleas to make sure they're dead and they're gone. Cool. Spray the environment. Okay, so that idea, we're going to go on to the next one. So definitely, so this idea of like killing them, making sure they eliminate each other. These are some awesome ideas. Now, what would happen if we were to just do, or actually, I want to go into the house. That suggestion, Michael, actually can launch us into that piece. So spraying the environment and kill them, right? So one idea is definitely with the house. What can we do specifically to the house to make sure that we remove this issue with the fleas long term? So one of them is we can spray the house, fumigate, what's it called? Fumigate, right? And so fumigate the house so that there's no more fleas in that house. What else can we do to the house in the backyard where the dog, where Pritch actually lives in? Burn it down and rebuild. So that's a great one. Burn that house down and rebuild it. Hopefully there's no more fleas hanging out around in those crannies in the corners. And any additional ideas? What can we do to the house? Buy a new one, replace that house, right? Awesome. Any additional ideas? Pass a no flea policy that the fleas, if you're ever gonna, you cannot enter into this house. Put a sign on there in the house. And so I know in the past I've heard a really funny one where I've heard young people say, "Well, throw it to the neighbor's house and let them take care of the flea problem, right, in the house, and I'll just replace the house with a new one." And so pretty much one, if we just look at, this is an example of, looking at an individual approach in itself, the chances of that dog in this example getting the fleas, if we just focus on the dog and say we were to shave the dog, take him to the vet, there's a high chance and probability of those fleas coming back for Pritch. But if we were to, go ahead and burn the fleas, shave the dog, take him to the vet, maybe put a dog collar on Pritch as well, and then also make sure that the house is clean. When we're able to address each of these components, there's a higher chance of Pritch not catching the fleas, rather than just shaving Pritch or just shaving him as well. There's a higher chance of them not coming back. We increase that probability by being able to address these other components outside of just Pritch. And so that leads me to the way that we approach our work within the Youth Leadership Institute and in our work with Friday Night Live and across all of our programs, is knowing that the individual, in this case, we have like the example of Pritch, it represents individual responsibility, a person's behavior. Normally there's a just say no approach. You shouldn't do this because it's bad. It kind of under this idea of like shaming. There's an information gap, which is like the focus is only on harmful effects. There's punitive measures. Sometimes the way this comes out in our work is like we punish young people for doing X activity, whether it's drugs, alcohol, whatever that is. But being able to look at these other components, the agent kind of, in the example with the doghouse activity that we just did, represents the fleas. And so the agent represents, in that example, the fleas, which are the things that are actually causing the harm. And we call them the 4 Ps of marketing. So it's product, promotion, price, and placement. So the product, for example, addressing, when we're talking about, reducing alcohol use amongst youth and minors, is a product being sweet and having fruity flavors where, it's attracting young people. And with the promotion, are the ads targeting young people? I know that sometimes we see, I think a lot of us have seen commercials where normally the ads for alcohol, for example, tend to show a good time, having a party. It's always like whenever you want to relax and sit down and chill, or every celebration, that alcohol has to be involved. And so that's one way. The other thing is that we see price. Sometimes what we've seen, at least in the city of Fresno, is a lot of times in some spots in Fresno, alcohol is cheaper than water because there have been so many liquor stores that are actually in competition with each other, so they drive prices down. So is alcohol cheaper than water? So that's looking at the agent. And lastly is placement. Are flavored, for example, flavored tobacco products, are they at eye level for children near candy and other sweets? So being able to look at the agent in the sense of the product, the promotion, the price, and the placement in terms of accessibility for young people. And then the last piece is environment, which in the example of the dog house represents the house that the dog, that Pritch actually lives in. So the environment, we need to look at the environment because there's a community responsibility and there's strategies to be able to change the settings and look at, root causes. And there's 4 ways that we do that, which is actually looking at media messages. What is a media say in terms of our, for example, billboards and stuff like that. Access, is it a healthy choice always? Is the healthy choice always the easy choice? Sometimes we realize that in some spots that there's too much access just in terms of the product is available so much because there's one liquor store here, one liquor store there, and every catty corner on the way home if a student's walking home. Policies, looking at youth influencing laws, and then looking at finally social norms, changing what is socially acceptable.
And just to add on to what Jose shared here, most of us are very familiar with the public health triangle. This is kind of representative of the public health triangle. As we engage in our programs, although we utilize an environmental approach for addressing the issue, when taking a deeper dive and looking at the issue before coming up with a solution about how to solve it, is we want to make sure that we're looking at it from a very holistic lens, that we're looking at all facets of the issue, that we're taking into account the individual's beliefs, the information gap with their knowledge of the substance, what they've been taught and told about the substance, also looking at the agent, what the product looks like and how it's being promoted, and then also like what this product looks like in a young person's environment. Part of that process is actually taking, as we had mentioned in our previous presentation, is taking young people on this journey to conducting their own community assessment. One of the vital portions of looking at this issue and addressing this issue is conducting their own kind of observational assessment and having young people really see from their perspective what are the messages that they're receiving in their own communities around this product and around the issue of alcohol. What are not just the media messages that they're receiving, what does the advertisement for alcohol look like, what does the access for alcohol look like in their community, in their homes, what are the policies that exist within their own community around alcohol, and underage use, and what are the norms. And what we found is that norms plays a really big role in the way that young people view alcohol, not just amongst their peers, but also cultural norms that exist within their families that help kind of young people shape the values and the beliefs that they have around alcohol as a substance, whether it's a positive substance or a negative substance. So when it comes to the way that we approach addressing underage drinking, there's 2 different approaches. One is like the individual prevention approach, which is the one that historically we've been maybe experienced as young people and are most aware of. What this focuses primarily is on the education and awareness rising around the risks and consequences of certain behaviors or actions when engaging with alcohol. This includes kind of like what we call intervention methods, where it focuses more on just making sure that we're providing young people with the information and hoping that by having the information about the product, that they're able to make good and wise decisions and knowledgeable decisions. So this includes activities that have been historically done, like educational pamphlets that give them information about the harms and consequences of alcohol, what actually happens to like your body as a result, and what are the consequences that can happen if you when you're intoxicated. Also mock car crashes, which we've seen done frequently. Classroom presentations, so this could be done by like a group or someone who's trying to provide education, or someone sharing kind of their real story about their entanglement or involvement with the substance, as well as posters and educational messages. So, you know, the educational messages that we're typically used to that say like, just say no, or don't do this, or don't drink because this will happen to you. Which a lot of the imagery and the messages that are promoted tend to be very scare tactic-y. The idea is to kind of scare a young person into changing their behavior. The next type of approach, but the approach that we utilize is, as we mentioned, is a more kind of holistic approach. What environmental prevention takes into account, as mentioned previously, is the physical, social, and political environment that influences a person's behavior. And what it does is it recognizes that decisions around healthy or unhealthy or good or bad behaviors is not just a matter of education and personal choice, but a matter of what's around you. It recognizes that if you're not creating an environment that's conducive to healthy decision making, then it's going to be really difficult for that young person to make a healthy decision. If you're constantly providing the education for a young person and telling them that they shouldn't drink, but when they're in their community, there's a corner store, but when they walk outside of the gates of their school or walk outside of their campus, there's a liquor store that's right across the street that's promoting a fruity alcohol product that is like strawberry flavored or milkshake flavored or something that's very appealing to young people, or and that it's a really reasonable price or a discounted price, and they're seeing family members and friends consume it. They're seeing in the media that it's normalized and it's accepted to drink. And they're also hearing from their peers that it's socially acceptable. It makes it really hard to make that healthy choice. And so what we're trying to do is remove those barriers that make that healthy choice the easy choice. I know that in the chat we had a question about what have been some of the challenges in dealing with policy makers around alcohol, since alcohol is so socially acceptable. I think what we found is really framing this issue as a way of it, and it might be in our next slide, that this isn't really to take an individual approach isn't really the approach that we want to take, because the issue of underage drinking is not really an individual issue, it's a community issue. And so we have to look at it from that perspective. And that's why it's important that we look at the surrounding environment and that we engage the environment around us in order to address it. And that includes the engagement of our policymakers. What we found is locally, as we're jumping into this environmental approach and looking at potential policy, is that decision makers, of course, are inclined to want to promote business and support local businesses to help kind of stimulate the economy of their neighborhoods and communities. And we think that this is important too. Part of the process is not just talking to decision makers, but also getting our retailers on board, because we recognize that our local retailers, that they can be assets to the community. We just want to make sure that they're responsible in their actions. And so this might look like asking them to think about their marketing practices and really considering the 4 Ps when we talk about product placement, making sure that their product is placed in an area that's like well lit and visible from the cash register, so that we can ensure that we're minimizing instances of young people or folks who are not supposed to be consuming alcohol from accessing it in the refrigerators. And also that it's clearly marked that in order to get into certain spaces in the market, that you have to be 21 to access that fridge, and that their employees are equipped and trained to be able to adequately card, and also look out for instances of shoulder tapping. This also includes looking at their marketing, and as a merchant taking their responsibility and saying no to distributors around putting excessive advertisement on their windows and walls, and making sure that the advertisement for those products and the placement of the advertisement for the products isn't within an eye level of a young person, and making sure that if your targeted audience is an adult, that it's actually in the eyesight and the eye level of an adult and not of a young child. So making sure that there's no placement of advertisements below 3 feet or below 4 feet. And it also looks at the types of products that you're willing to carry. And also looking at making sure that although you want to have a diversified kind of product in your store, that you're also being very cautious about like who those products are targeting, and making sure that you're as a merchant that you're choosing those that you know are going to be beneficial to the community.
Perfect. And so within that, the ways that we address the work is accessible. We have an acronym normally. It's MAPS, so Media Access Policy and Social Norms. Media, I'm actually going to rearrange it here, but media is television utilizing what are the messages that we see on TV? What do we see on billboards, promotional items, storefront ads, corporate websites, billboards, etc. So being able to address and change the messages that are being given to young people regarding alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. The next piece is access. How easy is it to obtain alcohol, tobacco, etc. For young people through the variety of ways that you've heard earlier, whether it's product, price, promotion. And then we have community norms or social norms, which is what is considered acceptable within a household, in a family, and within a certain community. And so being able to have our youth be able to address, like, change those social norms that are happening is important to being able to reduce the chances of young people accessing alcohol underage. And then lastly is laws, rules, and policies. Which are pretty much those that are determined by schools, governments, and businesses. And so being able to address and look at what are those policies or that are in place or not in place that have an impact in how accessible a product is to young people that can harm them. And so.
Mm-hmm. And as part of the rules and policies, one of the things that we stress to our young people is to think outside the box when they think of policies. Most people automatically think of like, oh, okay, so you're asking to change public policy, rules, and laws. But we also ask, as part of this programming, since we're trying to really push a more holistic approach of looking at the issue of underage drinking and addressing it as a community issue, that we're looking at institutional policies as well. And by institutions, we're also talking about the way that law enforcement monitors alcohol, the sale of alcohol and the distribution of alcohol licenses, that we ask our schools to look at their policies within around alcohol, and making sure that they're setting up a good message. And this could look like, making sure that their booster events don't serve alcohol, especially since the booster event is meant to support the school, and the school wants to make sure that they're instituting good, healthy policies for young people. And we also think about the family as an institution in terms of policy, is making sure, as Jose said, that thinking about those family values and rules that exist within your family around the way that you engage in alcohol in a party setting or in your home. In this chart, we're sharing a little bit about the differences between individual strategies and the environmental strategies that we use. At Wild Eye, we actually utilize both because we recognize that sometimes individual strategies can be leveraged or utilized as a platform to engage the community or young people in an environmental strategies. So when it comes to individual strategies, we know that those focus on behavior and behavior change. It's basically asking an individual to adjust their behavior. Individual strategies are also short-term and focus on program development. So they're not meant to be long-term. We also know that individual strategies generally do not, individuals usually don't participate in the decision-making whenever an individual strategy is utilized. Usually the one individual is the audience, and it also focuses on an individual's relationship to the problem. So the relationship that I have with the substance. While environmental strategies are a little bit different. They focus on policy and on access and policy change. An example is the Responsible Neighborhood Market Ordinance. That's an example of a policy change. They also focus on social, political, economic context of the problem and how it's impacting the larger community. It's also more long-term focus on policy development, so or on long-term change. It also includes people gaining power by acting collectively, because a lot of these approaches cannot be done by a single individual, but it requires young people acting, young people partnering with adults in their community in order to enact change. And it utilizes an approach where an individual is an advocate as opposed to a recipient of a service.
Perfect. And so a few examples of environmental prevention. I'm actually going to share one of them. Since in the previous presentation, we got to share about the Responsible Neighborhood Market Ordinance. I'm going to share about sticker shock. So I'm going to pull up the video and share that with you all. So give me 1 second here. All right, and so this is a quick clip regarding the sticker shock campaign that the youth did.
Celebration of National Red Ribbon Week, Fresno County youth leaders came together to educate our community about youth access to alcohol by placing stickers on alcohol products.
Disregard what they're saying, and it might cause them to want to do it instead, like drink alcohol. And I feel like if we are presenting to them, then the youth are more understanding of where we're coming from.
After seeing a similar movement in Southern California during a meeting, local youth leaders thought it would also be a great campaign to start here in the Valley.
At Papa Murphy's, we mean seriously. Chop.
All right, so let me go ahead and share the PowerPoint once again. So what you heard in that presentation or in that video was pretty much the sticker shock campaign, which was a way for young people to bring awareness regarding a statistic regarding the utilizing the student insight survey that they've conducted across the county within their school sites of all freshmen and juniors. That data point that they found was that 70% of young people who stated that they drink got it from an adult that they know. And so what they did was they placed that information on that sticker and then also included a policy that already exists in the city of Fresno and in a lot of the rural community and in some rural communities within Fresno County as well. In those specific communities, they also placed the same sticker with the information of the social host ordinance. And so pretty much that was an informational sticker where the social host ordinance states that if an adult ever gets caught providing alcohol to a minor, they can be fined up to $1,000 or go to jail for up to 6 months. And so part of it was informing people, not only is it not right, but there's an actual law and policy in place. And so the youth actually partnered up with liquor stores, all across Fresno County to be able to place those stickers. And when parents, it was interesting because I actually was part of joining the youth for that project. And it was really cool to see like when adults were buying alcohol, like they were reading, I can see them reading as they're carrying it out there because it was a bright yellow sticker, they were reading the sticker. And so a huge part about it was information based on that sticker. And then we have a couple examples of intervention, which I know we briefly touched on, such as like the every 15 minutes and the walk like mad examples as well.
So one of the things that we recognize is like things, although not sustainably effective, like the every 15 minutes because it has to, of course, be done like annually, and it's not education that's like being received by like a large group of audience always. What every 15 minutes and like Walk on Mad events do is they actually provide like a platform for that larger education. So what we do at Wildlife is we leverage some of those opportunities for like intervention, like activities like every 15 minutes or Walk Like Mad, and partner and participate with organizations who are leading those as a platform to kind of share the messaging that we've created. And so some of the messaging that we created was meant to kind of be conversation starters within the home. The sticker shop was one of them at some of these events. On top of putting these stickers on the actual products, some stores also allowed us to put them on the refrigerator doors. So it's something that's always there. And we were able to share this with community members that if you look at the local market, you're at your local market, sometimes you'll notice this sticker that's available on there that you'll see on the refrigerator door. It just gives you information about like what are some potential consequences for violating the local social host ordinance, which is that ordinance that basically says that adults cannot serve alcohol to minors, or they can potentially have to deal with a fine or jail time. And then also utilizing that as a way to encourage parents and community members to have conversations with young people in their home and hopefully engage them in participating in establishing a family alcohol policy. So we were leveraging that as a tool to kind of get this larger institutional home policy implemented in homes. And the same initiative was utilized too through our lawn sign campaign. The idea was to distribute these across the county. And for those homes that we were able to talk to the homeowner to put a lawn sign in front of their home, also encouraged that they take an example of a family alcohol policy to also institute in their homes. Because we know that those actually lead to more kind of concrete, ongoing sustainable change versus kind of like that one-time intervention.
Perfect. And so is there any questions? I want to open it up before we conclude today's this presentation. Any questions from the public that may have for us? I'm actually going to go ahead and feel free to type in the question that you asked, Michael, in the chat box. What have been the challenges in dealing with policymakers around alcohol, since alcohol is socially acceptable? I know that we briefly touched on the Responsible Neighborhood Market Ordinance. One of the things that really got to have the council's support in Fresno was that pretty much one of the ways that they were able to jump on board, because as Cynthia mentioned earlier, it does tend to be more focused on, well, it's more business coming into the community and it's going to leverage more dollars and more taxes, increase that budget. On our end, when the youth actually were able to share this, and the Councilman Arias was able to reach out because he was interested in actually moving forward with a policy, and the youth were able to give their input into that policy, was actually getting the Association of Petroleum and Convenience Stores on board. And when they jumped on board and actually said themselves, who are actual liquor store owners as well, they actually said, we are giving too many liquor licenses, that we're having to drive our prices down. So in reality, on the business side of things, it actually impacts the owners who already sell alcohol because there was too much competition. And so that was something that was able to get the other council members outside of just Arias, who was the one really spearheading this in the city of Fresno, to be able to jump on board and say, like, you know what, if this is something that we're hearing from the owners, let's go ahead and actually move forward with this. And so that was one thing. And in regards to the Responsible Neighborhood Market Ordinance, that ordinance in itself is going to help reduce the the amount of liquor licenses in the community long term. So Cynthia talked a little bit about, the importance of looking at issues long term rather than a short term approach. And so over the course of time, liquor stores will have to purchase an existing license, so it won't go over the amount that we currently have existing in Fresno, which is pretty much on average 1 for every 1,000 residents, when the state average is 1 for every 2,500.
And what we found is sometimes, compromises need to be made, because we also recognize that specifically for large scale events, sometimes those event coordinators or event organizers do depend on sponsorships from businesses in order for their event to be able to be held. And for Fresno, a lot of times we have some large scale alcohol distributors here in Fresno, and they tend to sponsor some large scale events like Clovis Big Hat Days, the Big Fresno Fair. And so in having conversation with those boards that lead those events, it was a little bit harder. About 7 years ago, we actually did an assessment of alcohol accessibility at the Big Fresno Fair. And our young people did an assessment to identify the number of alcohol acts they were exposed to at the fair, and also to see what the culture of alcohol use was at the fair. And what we found was that there was an excessive amount of advertising because of the sponsorships. And so when we engaged in a conversation with the fair board, they were willing to hear us out, but we also heard from them that a large part of that as a sponsorship, it was a really large sponsor that without it would be detrimental to hosting the fair. So we engaged in a conversation with them as well as the distributor and say, can we come to a compromise that could be that would be beneficial for the health of young people who frequent the fair and who want to kind of be kept from the excessive advertisement of alcohol in the fair. So the compromise that we came to, which has been instituted the last 4 years, was not just like the development of the beer gardens, but also limiting alcohol advertisement to the beer gardens. And so knowing that in order to enter the beer garden or to be in the space of the beer garden, you had to show your ID, and was like one thing that we asked. The other thing that we asked is looking at the proximity and the placement of the beer garden to the carnival game area. One of the things that we asked is that the beer garden not be placed in really close proximity to the carnival, because most young people, that's what they would go to the fair for, is to enjoy the carnival games and the rides that were there. And so by if they stayed in that area and the beer garden was not near them, then they wouldn't run the risk of having to be exposed to folks who are consuming alcohol and the advertisement of those alcoholic beverages. And so I think the fair board actually really heard us out, and they were willing to make sure that no beer garden was placed in really close proximity to the fair. So they were a distance away, and so they've been moved slightly. And they shared with us the feet adjustment that they were willing to do to ensure the safety around the exposure of the advertisements. And the other thing that they did is start implementing the ID booths, so that and also the requirement for certain beverages to be consumed only in the beer gardens. And so that was really helpful, because that helps shift kind of the cultural norms around, walking around the fair with an alcoholic drink and even in the carnival area, and having that exposure to advertisements to young people as they're walking around and enjoying the fair. And so we recognize that sometimes when it comes to changing policy, we're willing to have those conversations, as long as they're willing to kind of hear us out and know where young people are coming from. And we've actually had really positive response. I think what we've experienced the most in doing this work, or at least me specifically for doing this work for the last 11 years, is that decision makers are really excited to hear from young people. And anytime a young person comes to the table, they want to make sure that they're creating a space to hear that young person out, especially if they're bringing up a concern. And so those are not taken lightly, because they know that it takes a lot of courage to actually go up to a city council member or decision maker to kind of speak about your concern, because that's not something that's traditionally or normally done by a young person. And so we've had a lot of success in kind of getting ally support and moving some of those pieces forward that we'd like to see that are going to be in benefit of our young people.
Perfect. And that concludes the presentation. If you have any questions, additional questions that maybe we weren't in the chat box or have questions for us, you can feel free to contact me. My contact information is on the screen. Yeah, and feel free to reach out if there's any questions or ways for you to get involved. Definitely feel free to reach out. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Awesome.